Welcome to Biblioventures, Monsters and Ghosts. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we're going on a biblioventure through the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and A Christmas Carol. This is the sixth and final episode on Jekyll and Hyde, and we have a special co-host joining us today, author, annotator Leslie Klinger. Hi, Les. Welcome back.
Thanks, Ed. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, we love having you on these shows, as you've done several of them now. I really appreciate it. If you are watching live right now, I ask you to please like these videos. If you so choose, to subscribe to the Rosenbach's YouTube channel and have fun in the live chat. If you're watching the recording, thank you. I'm so happy you are watching. I ask also please like and subscribe. And welcome to any new viewers. I still had a couple people register for this show this week. So if you're new to this, I hope you enjoy it. All the episodes, all the past episodes are available to watch on our YouTube channel. It's easy to just catch up anytime. We bring this show free to you. So if you would consider making a donation to the Rosenbach, it would be much appreciated. Thank you if you've already donated or joined as a member. That's really how we get to do these shows for free, because of your support for the Rosenbach. So if you have not already donated or become a member, I invite you to do so. We are continuing our special offer for new members. If you become a member the day of the live stream of the show, you will receive an additional month added to your membership. That's 13 months. And before we start, it's time for cocktails. You still with me, Les?
Yes, I just was going to get some tchotchkes. I wanted to have things at hand, you know, here.
Ooh,
Little Jekyll and Hyde statue here. Little action figure here holding what appears to be a cocktail.
Yes, which is what I have. This cocktail tonight is called London Fog. Every episode features a Jekyll and Hyde cocktail and mocktail recipes for those who don't want to have the alcohol. Designed by Jobi Zink, Registrar and Associate Director of Collections at the Rosenbach, and a fine mixologist. You can find the recipes in the YouTube description for the episode. I also send out the recipe via email every week. If you're registered for the show, you can register at the Biblioventures homepage on rosenbach.org. This London Fog, Les, is gin, an Earl Grey simple syrup, lemon juice, and an egg white. Now, the recipe has lavender bitters as optional. I didn't have any lavender bitters, so I'm just winging it.
Well, I have to stay sober enough to watch the Dodgers game in a little while, so you know,
Well,
I'm on the West Coast time. So,
well, it will be happy hour. Well, no, it wouldn't be happy hour time. It would soon be happy hour time.
soon be a happy hour. You can be happy anytime. There you go.
There you go.
Especially when talking about Jekyll and Hyde.
Leslie Klinger, everyone, has edited more than 75 books. His new annotated Sherlock Holmes is the standard reference for Sherlockians. He has an annotated Dracula, Frankenstein, Sandman, Watchmen, Lovecraft, and more. But if you are a longtime Biblioventures watcher, you'll recognize Les because he's been on Sundays with Dracula, Sundays with Frankenstein, Sherlock Mondays. A good friend of the Rosenbach. Les, thank you so much, and welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
You have a new one, or your latest one.
Yes.
Dated Jekyll and Hyde, which
There
came out
it is.
last year. Did it come out?
It came out in October of 22.
22. Okay. So almost 2 years ago now.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I have to look and see. I think that's correct. It says copyright 2022. Yeah.
Yeah.
With an introduction by Joe Hill, by the way.
Yes.
Lovely introduction by Joe.
If you have questions for Les for us to answer tonight, I would be happy to answer them. As a matter, you guys can monopolize all you want tonight if you have questions about Jekyll and Hyde, about Les's book, and even later, if you have questions about other books that Les has done, I'll be happy to hit those later after we do Jekyll and Hyde. But first, Les, how did Jekyll and Hyde come about, and what took you so long to get to this one?
Well, first of all, in general, the process is to try and find a title that I enjoy that there has to be something I'm going to spend a lot of time with it, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But that's something that I really like. And then, sadly, it has to be something that I can convince a publisher who actually has an audience. This is uh, this is very frustrating when my list of the books that I haven't gotten to annotate yet, because the publishers have said, well, gee, but, Otto Penzler and I have wanted to do a book together for a while. And
I wanted to do what? I'm sorry, you kicked out there. What was that?
I said, Otto Penzler, the owner of
Yeah.
Mysterious Press and the Mysterious Bookshop, and I have wanted to do a book together for quite a while. And we kicked around titles, and it needed to be something that was serious. It needed to be something not necessarily a mystery, um, but something that we could fit into that sort of cross genre. It's mysterious. And I think Jekyll and Hyde is a mystery. Who murdered the Lord who's bludgeoned to death?
Yeah.
But so Otto, I tossed the title out there. Otto loved it, and we went for it. So
Do you have
it
did you,
fit. Well, it fit other criteria, I should say. I mean, it's sort of when you look at the iconic creatures of the 19th century, you look at there's a lovely book out called Modern Myth, um, which is a scholarly study of the creation of myths in recent times. And the first one in the book is Robinson Crusoe. The first one studied. The next one is Frankenstein. And certainly Jekyll and Hyde fit well, neatly into that pantheon. By the way, that pantheon includes Batman. Um, Superman, not quite so much because there's been too much sort of fiddling around with Batman. But so I like the idea. Hyde was the third great iconic figure of the 19th century that you have, or the fourth great that you have Holmes, you have Frankenstein, the Frankenstein's creature, um, you have Dracula, and you have Jekyll and Hyde. And that's it. That's sort of finishing up the pantheon. There isn't anybody else with sort of that stature.
Les, when we talked earlier, your mic was fine. It's kicking out a little bit here and there. I don't know if you just if you need to be
I
closer.
can try a headset and see if that's
Yeah.
better.
You were crystal clear earlier with me. Now the mic was kicking out a little bit. Let's try it now.
Uh, switch.
Sorry about that, everybody. A little tech issue to take care of as we're doing this.
In a much briefer statement, the four towering mythical figures of the 19th century would be Frankenstein's creature, Dracula, Sherlock Holmes, and Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to sort of finish it up.
Good. Do you have a memory of Jekyll and Hyde when you were younger? Can you recall your first encounter with it or a
Not
encounter?
really. I think it was probably the Spencer Tracy
Yeah.
version that I saw many years ago, and that's got lots of issues, but it's we have a much more saint-like uh, Jekyll than other versions. But
Yeah.
but no, I mean it wasn't. It was just something scary out there that I really hadn't paid a lot of attention to. I was an English major. I was supposed to be knowledgeable about all this stuff, but I find it's always a pleasure that when I take up one of these topics, how much I learn. I mean, I'm not coming to it knowing everything about Jekyll and Hyde and saying, oh, I better write all that down. It's like, I want to know everything.
It's like this is exactly how we approach the show too. I find well, first of all, it needs to connect to our collections, but then outside of that, is it big enough to attract, an audience, just like a publisher needs to know that we have to bring people in, and then it's also, yeah, but do I like it enough to do this deep dive every week when I have to talk to all these people about it, and can I sustain that? And so I get to I wind up going through the same process to choose these works.
Yeah, I mean, Wuthering Heights, probably isn't going to do that for me. Maybe
But
for you.
Jane Eyre did it for me. Let me tell you, I'd do Jane Eyre again if I could. It was the one show I didn't have you. Well, I didn't have you on Austen either. Pride and Prejudice. That was fun too. Adam wanted to know of the. I mean, I don't know if this is just an easy question. I'm gonna have to ask you
Oh,
for the
pick one
set.
of my children.
Yeah. Well, he says. He said, "Do you have a favorite Gothic novel?" And then he says, "Of those four iconic myths you mentioned, do you have a favorite?" So not your books necessarily, but those books.
Well, of course. I mean, Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, there
Sherlock Holmes has been my passion. It's Sherlock Holmes is how I got here. Uh, it's this started. I mean, it's. I look back on my reading history, and it's a little bit of a surprise that Sherlock Holmes is what I answered, because until I was maybe 19, maybe no older, really till I was in my uh, very early 20s, 2021. Science fiction was all I read. Um, I loved science fiction. I read hundreds of science fiction novels. Um, and then I got the Baring Gould Sherlock Holmes as a gift and said, oh, I guess I better read some stuff in the mystery genre. And went out and read Chandler and Hammett and Sayers and things like that to sort of get better educated. But I was very late coming to the Gothic and horror, and certainly Sherlock Holmes.
Mhm.
Um, but then it became this passion, and it was the next 40 years with Sherlock Holmes, and then it's sort of like, okay, now that I got immersed in the Victorian age, I better do more.
Olivia Retigliano and I talked about this on one of the other episodes, or no, I think a couple of the episodes about the kind of mystery detection, themes or going on in Jekyll and Hyde, and um, does it connect well with the Sherlock Holmes stories?
Absolutely. Although, the detective is a little bit colorless, let's put it that way. Mr. Utterson is
Yeah.
the detective, uh, and he doesn't have any of the panache of a Sherlock Holmes or any of Holmes's imitators, but it very much is that kind of a story of we've got clues, and he's got clues, and he's trying to track them down and figure out what the heck is going on here. So it really is a mystery story,
Yeah.
um, and it fits very well into that whole picture. And it's there it is in fog-bound London, uh, Holmes's turf. There's a reason why people have written crossovers with Holmes and Jekyll and Hyde and and imagined them, and some of the same actors have even been around. So
Doyle was quite taken with Stevenson as well, and we
yes,
pointed out more than once that we thought that there were real echoes of that. Well, that things, inspirations that Doyle took from Stevenson and this story.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. He didn't admit to inspirations very much in
Yeah.
for anything, but he clearly absorbed all this stuff, and it went both ways. I mean, this is a small town of writers, London,
Mhm.
and you know, Stevenson was just sort of starting out. He was young, and then he didn't hang around very long, and he wasn't sure he wanted to be an artist, or he was sure he didn't want to be a barrister, but he sort of got out of town fairly quickly. But nonetheless, I think they all know each other and they knew each other's stories. And
Yeah.
uh,
And corresponded some as well, but I don't think they ever met in person. I think
I
all
think
these
that's
other
correct.
people met, but Stevenson was just out of London and not
Right.
and a little earlier than
I
Doyle too.
reproduced there are I think, two letters that I reproduced for a pamphlet for the Baker Street Irregulars last year
Mhm.
between Doyle and Stevenson, and they're interesting. So
Stevenson mentioned something like the stories are good to read before he sleeps, or the
yes,
Sherlock stories, or something like that. And not sure how well Doyle would have taken that. Um,
yeah. But the other thing that interests me about Jekyll and Hyde, as with Holmes, as with Frankenstein, as with Dracula, is the word I like to use is plasticity. but sort of this comes with being iconic, larger than life, mythical, etc., that people have taken the core ideas and adapted them in so many different ways. I'm not talking about just telling the same story. I'm talking about telling new stories in new settings, and uh, it's the sign of great writing that they've
Yeah.
created these characters that are just so gigantic.
And with Stevenson, with this book, it's even more than the characters in the story itself. It's the idea of a Jekyll and Hyde has become so ubiquitous, and frequently it's used in ways that's not really what's going on in the story.
Right.
But from the start, this is happening with this. The preachers giving sermons.
Yes. Well,
On
that's
the
yeah.
story.
It's the public life of the story is a little bit sad. I mean, Stevenson was like, people were shocked that he had written this disgusting book. Uh, and it's interesting because I think the Victorians were reading things into it that I'm not sure were quite intended to be there. Uh, we don't really know what it is that Dr. Jekyll, and I know, by the way, thank you for saying Jekyll earlier. That was
Yeah,
very nice.
I give
Did you
one
try?
Jekyll early on, and
Yeah,
then I figure I'm covered for the rest of my Jekylls
there you
because
go.
I can't shake it.
No, nobody can. And so we're just going to say it wrong. It's like Frankenstein.
Peter Cushing always said it correctly.
So, but I mean, we know that Jekyll seems to be atoning for some bad things he did when he was younger. I mean, we think he's sort of been covered, but what it was, we don't know. And yet there were sermons. It's like, be sure you don't do that stuff,
Yeah,
whatever it was.
as if it's a story about how you can, get rid of your evil side, and that's a good thing to do. But it's him not getting rid of it. It's him letting himself be it.
Yes. Well, we promised not to talk about the.
We'll hit that at the end.
Yes.
Um, and yeah, and I mean not only sermons, but I do the Google alerts for whenever I do shows, and it's interesting that I get more all the Jekyll and Hyde hits I get that happen that the Google gets alert about are either dramatic productions being put on, the musical or just straight drama shows, um, sports metaphors. I can't believe how much Jekyll and Hyde is used for sports teams. And it's every day someone is writing about a sports team being a Jekyll and Hyde team, and true crime. It's still frequently used, at least
Well,
by the public.
that that of course is really interesting
Yeah,
um, because of the origin story of the novel that in fact Stevenson probably based this on a true crime story that he knew about, a man who lived a dual life. I assume you talked about that earlier on the
we
show.
have talked about Deacon Brody. Yeah, with Paul Chapman especially.
Uh,
We talked a lot about Deacon Brody, but that's it does. It begins with true crime for Stevenson in his head. I mean, from childhood, this story he knows.
yeah. Uh, and he was fascinated by it and wrote his own play of it. So it wasn't just a story that he knew; it was a story that he wanted to work with,
Yeah.
uh, and did. It's not well known, and it's hard. I don't think it's ever been performed. His little play,
Oh,
but
it had some time on the stage then.
oh, back then, yes,
Yeah. But now it's if you read it now, yeah, it's not going to get performed now. But it's still alive. Do you ever see there's a BBC movie, a dramatization. It's not the play itself, but it's a dramatization of Deacon Brody with what's his name? Connolly, the Irish actor, or the Scots Billy Connolly playing Deacon Brody, and it's a little bit comic, but also very much like he's this heroic, Robin Hood-esque kind of,
yeah.
bad guy who commits these crimes against all the people that you wouldn't like anyway.
I'm just looking at some of the pictures in my book here, some of the early stage productions. The you know, there's a thread of similarity here between Frankenstein and Dracula and Jekyll and Hyde. They all suffered the same fortune, which was so in these years, the authors had a great deal of difficulty protecting themselves under the copyright laws from being ripped off with stage productions. They'd write their book and then somebody else would put it on the stage. Stoker was the only one smart enough to do something about it by writing a terrible dramatic version of Dracula, which he then immediately produced. And it was, I think, never produced again. It's 5 hours long or something. Because it's essentially the book word for word.
Yeah,
But
and that's also for copyright purposes. He does the
yes,
reading on the stage, and yeah.
right. But Mary Shelley and was faced with much the same as Stevenson, which was sort of immediately after publication, somebody said, "Oh, I'll do a stage play out of it,"
Yeah.
without Stevenson getting anything out of it. But very quickly, it got to the presentation with Richard Masefield, and we'll talk more, I think, about sort of public life of Jekyll and Hyde on the screen, but that's one I really wish were preserved. It's unfortunately not just photographs, but
Yeah, they don't. The play itself isn't intact, right?
right.
Is there some notes from in a collection, or is there somebody else's manuscript of it in a collection?
There are, it's the play itself is around, but I mean the text of the play, but
Okay.
Mansfield was this incredible um, actor. I mean, who on stage in front of the audience, no blackout curtains, no nothing, transformed from Jekyll to Hyde,
Hmm.
and people were just aghast. They were just blown away by this, and it sounds like it was just sort of one of the uh, incredible things. I mean, people said he wore a rubber suit that let him do this. And he said, look, that all he ever did was change the muscles of his face and the tone of his voice and the posture of his body. And they saw this with the lighting helped, but
And the
there was this
lighting, yeah.
incredible transformation on stage from Jekyll to Hyde.
And people believed it in a sense that they were. I mean, there seem to be accounts that people really think that he's able to change himself on stage, and it's just not acting because they hadn't really seen this kind of transformation before that
Right.
Mansfield had done.
That's right. Now we can see uh, not the same, but a similar phenomena in the Barrymore film, um, which again, I mean, people think is they think it's makeup, they think it's special effects,
It's
etc.
1920 silent film. Barrymore. Is
On
it
YouTube,
Universal? Is it Universal? Is it what is it? I can't remember.
it's Paramount,
Paramount. Yeah.
and yeah, I mean, it's just astonishing, and you can find it on YouTube. And just watch the scene where he sits there and transforms from Jekyll into Hyde.
Yeah.
This consummate acting, and very important to get the point across,
Hmm.
uh, which is it isn't anything artificial.
It's coming out of him. It's himself
Yes,
changing. Yeah. Well, later in the film, there's some prosthetics and makeup changes, but the first transformation you see is just that, is him going through it all and changing. Um, and there were many silents even before that.
oh yes,
There's more
yes.
than a dozen silents, some of them lost, some of them still around. And are any of them worth watching besides that one?
Um, I'm not sure they are. The they're very strange. The one that is somewhat interesting is the uh, one with Marguerite Snow and directed by James Cruz. Harry Bentham is Hyde in most of the scenes. This is the 12-minute film in which he runs over a girl and then races back to his cabin and he commits suicide. It's very short. It's only 12 minutes long.
Mhm.
But it's interesting. It's got some of the moral issues, but it's not I mean, the short answer is no. And they're mostly lost anyway, but there are some on YouTube. If you search on YouTube, you'll find some of these old films, strangely. But no, we have to come a lot farther forward to find actual films that you can see. There's the let's see, what's the name of? I can never remember the name of the Stan Laurel one.
I don't know either.
There's
Sam Laurel's in one.
yeah.
Is it a comedy?
Yes, here it's called Dr. Pickle and Mr. Pride, 1925. It's on YouTube, and worth worth watching just for fun. But yes, I'm looking at my own book to see which ones are on YouTube. The earliest one on YouTube, I see. So the King Baggett version from 1913 is on YouTube. And there's a link to it in my book. You'll see the citation in the table.
And that's
there.
Universal.
And let's see, that's the 1913. That's Universal. Yes.
Yeah.
The Thanhauser one, I said the 12-minute long one is also on YouTube. That's from 1912. So those are the oldest that I've ever seen. Those are the oldest ones.
Max McGee, who's Sherlock and you might know, he's going to be on the Christmas Carol show co-hosting too. He had posted on our Facebook page that that 1913 Jekyll and Hyde, maybe you have to count that as the first Universal horror, and the first Universal monster at least is Mr. Hyde in that film, because it is what becomes Universal, that because they're distributing it and it becomes Universal Studios after they make it.
There you go. Why not? Yeah, so there are comedies that go back. There's many that are lost, unfortunately, but there's pretty good information about these films that you can find on the internet and in my book. And unfortunately, most of them are long gone, but some of the early ones are available. There's a 1920
as are most silence. So 80%, something like that, or have been lost. So we're lucky to have what we have.
Right. But the Barrymore is intact. The 1920 Barrymore is intact and absolutely worth watching.
Yeah.
As is, of course, the 1931 Frederick March. And so
do you have a favorite in the sound films?
Well, yeah, the Frederick March, I think.
Yeah, the 1931 Robert Mamoulian directed.
Yes. But there's some lovely films. They're different takes, different ideas. As I said, the Spencer Tracy one is one that I found memorable. It's got, I mean, what can you say about a film that's got Spencer Tracy, Ingrid Bergman, and Lana Turner in it? Not too shabby.
Yeah, and then I watch it and I'm just a little bored. I mean, I really think it misses the mark. I think
it does.
I think it's the difference between pre-code Mamoulian 31 and then
this is 1941,
that has to make sure it doesn't do anything too outrageous, racy, provocative. And I think it shows. But it is unusual for Tracy choosing to do the kind of performance where it's just there is makeup, but it's not a lot, and it doesn't completely change him. He doesn't become this kind of monster looking person in it, this beast looking person. But really, in that way, it really serves a purpose to show that this is just kind of the same person, but just
One of the ones that I have not seen that I really would like to see, if anybody knows how you can get a copy of it, I'd like to know. And that's the Jack Palance one with Denham Elliott, made in 1968.
You can find it on Amazon. I just watched it recently, and it's very good.
I'm not surprised. I was talking yesterday with an actor friend about our favorite Dracula films, and we both said Jack Palance's Dracula.
Yeah. Dan Curtis made them.
Dan Curtis made that, and people remember him doing push-ups on the stage of the Oscars, and that's kind of all they remember, or him being a villain in a lot of cowboy movies. But he was a powerful actor in these kinds of roles.
Yeah. And did a Jekyll and Hyde, and then did the Dracula. His Jekyll and Hyde's very good, and it's he's this very rakish Mr. Hyde who's having the most fun he could have, running around London hurting people, and there's a glee to him in this that makes it fun to watch. And I like the ending. But I won't say what it is. I think it's a good ending on it as well.
He's got that rare combination of sophisticated brutality. How's that for an expression? Which is conveyed in Dracula as well. That you can see the creature, the monster underneath that veneer of sophistication. One of the other things that really interested me about Jekyll and Hyde, as in the case of other books that I've worked on, is the craft, the process of the writing, and what we can learn about it by studying manuscripts, notes, early versions. And Jekyll and Hyde is not quite as rich a source of mine as Dracula, but nonetheless, we have 3 different versions of the text to work with. We have fragments of, so the original manuscript, everybody has heard the story,
We've
was
talked
burned,
about it. Or was it? We don't know.
We don't know, but we don't know who burned it. It was probably burned. It was probably burned by Stevenson at his wife's behest, probably. But in any event, it doesn't appear to exist anymore. Then we have the fragments of the second manuscript of his reconstruction of what he had written when he decided to do it again.
The notebook draft.
Yes, what I've called the notebook drafts. Unfortunately, that's not complete, but there's a lot of it and a lot that we can gather from it.
That's the one that Dr. Rosenbach had. Dr. Rosenbach once bought that and then, later sold it. Actually, Philip sold. I think his brother sold it later because Dr. Rosenbach hadn't sold it yet, and Philip sold it at a bargain rate because he was like, "You got to sell."
So it's not in your collection.
Not in our collection now.
So the pages of that are spread around. I was trying to see if I could quickly see which the institutions are. It's broken up into a couple of places.
Most of it's at Yale, isn't it? That's the one that most of it's at Yale at the Beneke. And then the printer's copy is at the Morgan, I think.
Right. So right. The Beneke has fragments at Yale. Princeton has 2 pages. The Silverado Museum in St. Helena has 1 page. So most of it, and when we say most of it, it's only 1, 2, 17, 21, 22 pages. It's only 22 pages at Yale, out of over 100. So a good deal of it is missing. Then we have the printer's copy, which is a 64-page typed draft. All of that, almost 98% of that is at the Morgan in New York. 1 page is at the Silverado Museum.
And Stevenson made notes on that as well.
He did. This was, there are proofreader marks and corrections and changes to the text. And I think I reproduced somewhere in the book a photo of a page of that. But one of the things that I wanted to do is I love to do this kind of analysis now because we can, in part, but I love to look at the changes and see what got added, what got subtracted, and then to think about why and try and understand why the author put things in, took them out.
Yeah.
This has been studied in depth by a scholar, but in my book, this is for the first time you will see sort of in one volume, you'll be able to see all of the variants of the text. I reproduced at great length the changes with deletions and additions and so on. And we can see some paths that Stevenson didn't go down. There's an entire character missing. There's a character.
Mr. Lemson. I have that noted here too. I love that. That's page 25 of your book here, note 90. This is someone has come to consult Utterson. He studied Mr. Lemson covertly. He was still a youngish man of about 28 with a fine forehead and good features, anemically pale. Uh-oh, this vampire here. Shielding a pair of faint, suffering eyes under blue spectacles. And this sounds like Gary Oldman in Coppola's Dracula. And dressed with that sort of external outward decency that implies both a lack of means and a defect of taste. By his own confession, Mr. Utterson knew him to be a bad fellow. And in this short scrutiny, he read him through and through, made out very plainly that he now saw for himself that he was an incurable cad. And he's apparently there to do some business with Utterson, which we imagine will connect with Hyde in some way, maybe.
Yes, we don't know.
Storyline here. This reminds me of going through Stoker's notes for Dracula and all these characters that he had created. What was this
the detective, right? The psychic, all these. It's sort of too bad.
Or the blood room. I want the blood room. I can't believe he cut out the blood room. But yeah, fast but we don't have a complete manuscript, which is a shame.
Yes, but we had to make do. So I did. So I spent so a lot of my time was spent typing, trying to reproduce the vagaries of a manuscript and switching between struck through text and bolded, added text and so on. It's the good thing I like typing.
Here's one I'm fascinated by, because we talked about names in this book and names of characters and then of course I was curious as why is he called Edward Hyde? Like, what about that name appealed to Stevenson to give it to the evil side of Jekyll? And originally he had written, you have this on page 112 here, it was Henry Hyde, Henry Hyde a couple times, and then he's crossed it out, and Jekyll was just calling himself Henry Hyde because he's Henry hiding, which I think is funny, and maybe that's why he changed it. But that's fascinating that he would be that obvious about the name in the beginning.
The whole origin of this book, I mean, it's analyzing to take Stevenson at face value when he says, look, this was, I dreamed the book. And I mean, I personally have had that experience. Mine was a short story, not a novel. So I at least have been through it. And one of the two short stories I've ever written in my career. But sort of it came to me in a dream. It really can happen. The problem is when you sit down to try and turn it into something that you're going to publish, it has to be coherent. Dreams are so coherent while you're having them, and then you start to write them down. You say, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. So Stevenson said that this was all his little gremlins. His brownies, yes. His brownies wrote this story and he just sort of copied it down. But then when you look at the manuscript, you see the artist and you see him making thoughtful decisions about what to leave, what to keep, how to reshape and all that. And they're not inconsistent in my mind, but they're fascinating. I did this kind of textual study with Frankenstein in great detail. I did it with Dracula in immense detail, having had access to the manuscript, which at that time nobody else had seen. And I did it with Neil Gaiman's American Gods, because Neil gave me his handwritten drafts to look at. And it just is to me, if you want to be a writer, and not a writer of boring stuff like I write, but a writer of creative things, uh, I think studying that process and seeing what goes on and what went into the classics is revelatory.
Absolutely. And I thank you for bringing it out too, this kind of stuff. You have an interesting note here, and you quote it from Peter K. Garrett from an essay called Cries and Voices Reading Jekyll and Hyde, how you mentioned that we don't get a reaction from Utterson after he reads these narratives. And I hadn't thought of that. And that's fascinating that we don't get that, right?
Yeah, he's not a well-developed figure.
But it seems so important that like now like that's just lost. That's not part of the story anymore. But was the whole story leading up to this.
That's right. I
I'm
mean, the
trying.
book is Utterson,
Yeah.
and we do have a sense of who he is. We have a sense that he's kind
Yeah.
of a boring guy, um, at least a guy who is tightly controlled, let's say,
Yes.
and very mindful of his petty sins and trying to work around them. And now he hears this story, and we don't get any, oh, gee, that sounds like fun, or whatever his reaction was.
Yeah.
Like, his reaction might have been, I can't believe my close friend Dr. Jekyll was doing this. Did he know more than he told us? Did Utterson know more? Did he know Jekyll when he was younger and understand what his sins were? And we don't know.
Yeah. Things we like to know, but also things that Jekyll backstory is we're kind of fortunate in a sense, I think, that Stevenson leaves it out, right? That we don't know what his sins were.
It doesn't. I mean, I think he left it out for artistic reasons of it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It really doesn't matter what his sins were. What matters is that he regarded them as sins. He regarded them as something that he wanted to put behind him and repress and atone for, which is very much sort of the mode that he's in this stage of his life, which is, trying to make up for the bad things that he did when he was young.
Is he? All right. This is a discussion we'll have now. I mean, is he atoning, or is he just finding a way to put a disguise on so he can pursue those things? And then when it gets out of hand, of course, he's sorry, but he's never seems to be sorry for the things that Hyde does. He seems sorry that he's going to get caught.
Oh, I think that's right.
Yeah.
I think that's right. I think he finally says, you know what, I can't deny that this is who I am. But up until then, I think he is trying hard to keep it under control and make up for what may have been sins. What kind of sins? I think. I mean, my own speculation is that it was probably homosexuality that he engaged in when he was younger, that he's now repressed. But maybe not. Maybe it was just he was debauched and hanging out with hookers every day, and who knows? Maybe he was just doing drinking. But there's so many possibilities.
None of which Stevenson would have thought would have been, sinful, bad stuff. But this is all things that Stevenson did and kind of was okay with. So it's not. So this isn't one of those morality tales, which is my point. Like, and
Yes.
that gives it, I think, a complexity or a subtlety that makes it significant. If it was just Stevenson saying "Don't be bad," this story wouldn't have made it.
Well, that's right. This is not a morality tale. This is much deeper than that, and it's not, notwithstanding what the audience is made of it. It's not a finger shaking at don't be bad.
Yeah.
It's just the opposite. It's this is the price of not knowing yourself.
There you go. Or maybe suppressing parts of yourself, then leading to tragedy, leading to then you becoming a monster.
That's right. The old what is he? This is the old war of the limbs.
Members.
Such a great members. The old war of the members. Such a great word, members.
Yeah.
But it's a young man's book. It's not an old man. This is not Stevenson in his old age looking back saying, yeah, boy, I had some good times and maybe I shouldn't have had such good times and all that. This is a young man still very much in the thick of the battle.
Speaking of members, let me take a moment to thank all of you for watching this episode. As a nonprofit organization, the Rosenbach Museum and Library depends on the generosity of friends and supporters like you to keep programs like this free and accessible to hundreds of fellow biblioventurers worldwide. I hope you will consider supporting the Rosenbach and this show by donation, which you can do so at our website, or by becoming a member. There's my tie-in. Membership gives you free museum admission, discounts on programs and courses, exclusive invitations to member-only events, and early access to registration. You can learn more about how to become a member on our website. And that early access matters because, Les, we've sold out everything. All of our courses sold out, which is great. And who got first crack at them? Members. So thank you to all of you who have donated or joined as members and helped us all take this Biblioventure. And we just a final reminder, we're still running a special offer for new members. If you become a member the day of a live stream of the show, so if you become a member on 10/28, the day we're live streaming this one, you receive an additional month added to your membership. You get 13 months. And I want to thank a couple people who have joined a couple weeks ago. Gretchen S. from Bristol, PA became a member. And G. Steve H. From Iowa City, Iowa became a member last week on when the show aired. So thank you to you both. There are lots of great programs and courses at the Rosenbach, and even more coming up in the winter and spring that we're putting together. And don't forget, the Ghosts of Christmas are coming. On our next episode, we'll begin our 6-part series on Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. We will take a week off. So if you're watching live or around live, the live stream of The Christmas Carol is on November 11th, 2024. And then there'll be 6 episodes of that to enjoy. You can also join us on the Facebook group page, Biblioventures, Monsters, and Ghosts, for lots more info, news, links, conversation, and fun about the stories we're covering. And you can always write to me at epettit@rosenbach.org, EPETTIT. I love to hear from our audience. All righty.
So there's no wars at the members, however.
We have no member wars at the Rosenbach. It's nothing but thank you, members at the Rosenbach. Benefits to the members at the Rosenbach.
So
go ahead.
Looking at popular culture, I was thinking one of the things that I was very grateful to Otto Penzler for when he published this book is, so I sent him lots of pictures. And that's the best part of doing any of these books, is pulling together the pictures. And I sent him all kinds of lovely images, and I assumed that most of them would be black and white, and they're not. And so we get pages like this.
Yeah, a lot of these great full color comic
Batman,
books.
Jekyll and Hyde, and reproductions of the Mad magazine covers, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Mad, and things like that. I mean, just all these wonderful images that I got to reproduce in the book. You know, it's a popular book. What could I say? It's a subject, not my book, the book. It has reverberated for more than a century because nothing's changed. We all face the same issues that poor old Dr. Jekyll did. Now, that isn't to say that there are interesting twists, and today, I mean, there are also gender issues, and they were sort of interestingly hinted at in some of the strange film versions. One of them is Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, for example, in which Jekyll turns into a woman, and you know, I don't think that that's out of line. It seems to me that that's very much part of the text, although it certainly wasn't something Stevenson was going to write about. Uh,
1971. It's a Hammer film. Roy Ward Baker directed. It's got Ralph Bates and Martine Beswick in it. And like like most of those early 70s into the 1970s Hammer films, it's how much sex can we put in a horror film and get away with it? Without it becoming like without it going completely into pornography. I mean, they love doing this with all the horror, especially the vampire ones as they were going into the 1970s, because codes were becoming more relaxed. But that Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde is really interesting.
it is, it is, as is some other sort of strange movies that have popped up over the years. I mean, Mary Riley, starring what's her name, Julia
Julia
Roberts.
Roberts. Speaking of that, it's actually Julia Roberts' birthday today, and I know that because I was watching Mary Riley today, and as I was looking it up, it said that Julia Roberts' birthday is today. And That's an interesting one. With I don't love the movie, but it's absolutely worth watching, I think. John Malkovich is Jekyll and Hyde, and Julia Roberts plays Mary, and she's a servant in the house. So it's the Jekyll and Hyde story told through her
Yes,
perspective.
yes. Now it's not as good as, say, Jekyll and Hyde Together Again, you know.
That's Sean Young.
uh, yeah, that's right. Yes. Uh, Mark Blankfield and Bess Armstrong, in which, I mean, it's just Paramount 1982. Uh, Pretty darn silly. Uh, but looking at the list of films, I said that I thought that Spencer Tracy maybe made the first impression on me. I think that's wrong. I think it was probably The Nutty Professor.
Oh yeah.
Seeing Jerry Lewis turn into the professor, and I mean, turn into the creature, and have Count Basie's orchestra in the movie. I thought, wow, that is cool, and maybe I should be like Jekyll and Hyde. I was a teenager. What could I say? It was a
People
powerful
forget that
film.
Nutty Professor, and then even the Eddie Murphy remakes. It's a Jekyll and Hyde story.
Absolutely,
That's where it's
absolutely.
from.
And of course, I held up the Batman cover because Batman is Two-Face was
Yeah,
very much
somebody's
Jekyll
asking
and
this
Hyde.
right now. Somebody wanting if Two-Face was inspired by Jekyll and Hyde or even Batman.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it definitely was. Absolutely.
And
Uh,
Batman himself is a kind of Jekyll and Hyde character. He's got this respectable millionaire Bruce Wayne side, and then he hides
that's right. This
himself to become the Cape Crusader.
this incredibly dark, inspired by
Dark,
creatures of the
violent.
night.
Yeah.
Yes. Bats. Wow. Uh, yeah. So this is, as I said, the book has survived because it's it wasn't a new idea then, and it isn't a new idea today. Uh, Psychology obviously changed everything as we understood more about the id and the ego and all those
Yeah.
things. But it's still about the war of the members, as we said.
And Stevenson is reading those same kind of case studies himself that Freud would read and other people were reading at the time that come to, develop this psychology of the mind. Um,
Yeah, I did some
Stevenson,
research into the split personality cases, and wow, they are fascinating. There's such a there's a lot of detailed information about sort of famous split personalities, and it, it's still not a well-known subject. I mean, it's still not a well-known field in terms of
yeah.
understanding the whys and the hows and all that. But I mean, you go back to movies like Three Faces of Eve and things like that. I mean, it's the psychology of it is fascinating.
You have a fascinating note too related to that on moral insanity. Do you remember this? This is on page 90. Um, you talk about historian David Jones talking about the diagnosis of, oh, in the text it is this is uh this is Jekyll's full statement, and it must have been the I declare at least before God, no man morally sane could have been guilty of that crime upon so pitiful a provocation. He's talking about murdering Sir Danvers Carew. No man morally sane. And you have this about from David Jones, about the diagnosis of moral insanity that was going on in the 19th century. Do you have that there?
Yes. Yeah. We now see the definition. We now see this defense all the time, the Twinkie defense and others. It's like, well, it couldn't control himself, uh, could not, it could not form an intention to commit criminal behavior and therefore shouldn't be held guilty. Uh, and we need not get into the right or wrong of whether that's a good idea from societal point of view, to allow that to be a defense to criminal acts. Uh,
But it's something that really develops in the 19th century in law
yes,
and in the public eye, that people are really debating these ideas and trying to work this out finally, instead of just someone's insane and then we just hang them anyway. And
right. And keep in mind, it's in part because the punishment is so draconian. I mean, you can't, there's no gray areas if you're going to hang somebody. They're going to be, you're either going to kill them or you're not. And so it's a pretty big step to say, let's hang somebody. And so there was all this debate about whether it was something that you should be terminating people for being for taking acts that they couldn't be morally held responsible for. Uh, but I think those lines have blurred considerably in our society today when we say, I'm socially irresponsible, I'm psychologically immature, whatever. All the well satirized in the West Side Story uh, musical,
oh, yes, of course. Thank you.
in which Riff
The
sings about how he's no good because he's psychologically depraved,
what's that? The
or
Officer
yes,
Krupke song?
Officer Krupke, yes.
Yeah. Um, Speaking of
The
this idea,
musical version. Speaking of the musical version of Jekyll and Hyde, is that what you?
well, we can do that. I've never seen any of the Jekyll and Hyde musical. Have you ever seen it live, or
No.
just have you seen the videos of it?
Yes.
Yeah, I've never seen it. Is it? I understand adding the romantic subplot to these movies and how this kind of works for them, but how does the I can't imagine how this is a musical in in all my Jekyll and Hyde experience. This isn't the one I would have done. Like the
Uh,
Phantom, I get, and I still think that that's not good. But
well, and the Phantom is, of course, set in the world of music.
yeah,
So, it's a story about the Paris Opera. So, of
yeah,
course, it's uh, uh, and by the way, yes, Phantom has been on my list of books I'd love to annotate, but it's been done. There's very good annotated Phantom. I did annotate it lightly, by the way, for the Haunted Library of Horror Classics. For those, I know that the audience was dying to know why I haven't annotated Phantom of the Opera. Uh, you'll have to look for it. It's a paperback. It has no pictures. Uh, it's actually continues to sell well on Amazon. It's the Haunted Library of Horror Classics volume on Phantom of the Opera. But yes, back to Jekyll and Hyde the musical. Well, why not? I mean,
yeah.
psychological torture makes for great opera. Why wouldn't it make a great musical?
Okay.
There's not a lot of, I wouldn't see a lot of dancing in it. I wouldn't expect that.
And it's not the first musical of it. You haven't seen the 1973 Kirk Douglas made for TV musical of it, have you?
No, I have not.
Because I haven't either, and I would love to know if there's any way to ever get a hold of that. I think that they are Kirk Douglas's heirs, or probably like no one's ever going to see this ever again. But yeah,
It's one of those stories, I was musing about this yesterday in the context of Sherlock Holmes and sort of what public domain status does. And Jekyll and Hyde has been in the public domain for so long that people have been able to do anything they want with it. Unlike the Sherlock Holmes stories, which have now just entered the public domain. And once again, people are doing anything they want.
Yeah. I want to head back to the split personality that we were talking about, because I'd ask you about this, because this is the way this story is generally interpreted now, and in films, almost always this way, that the Jekyll and Hyde are like what we see. And I mean, I'm not saying this is true to real psychological cases, but in movie versions of split personalities, where someone has this multiple personality disorder, and one side doesn't even know what the other side is doing, and one side is in complete control when they're there, and they really are separate identities within a being. And this seems to be what happens in so many films, but I don't find this in the book at all. Do you?
No, they're not separate personalities.
Yeah.
They are the same person. And this is G.K. Chesterton was the one who expressed this most masterfully in criticism that I quoted at some length in the book, that this is a man who gave himself permission to ignore part of his own character, and to sort of let that, we all do that. We go to a bar, we're with friends, we have a couple of drinks, we say, all right, I'm going to stand up on a chair and I'm going to sing a silly song, even though everybody's going to say, Edward Pettit doing that? We give ourselves permission to do something that is something that we have repressed, or that is out of character, so to speak, for us. But that's what Jekyll does it to the extreme.
Yeah.
And it becomes murderous.
Yeah.
He lets himself off his leash and doesn't know how to put the leash back on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not some magical chemical that it's not external forces changing him into a different person, which is what these often depict.
Mm-hmm.
The movies kind of the same route as Frankenstein films, which is bad science. Don't mess with these things, because you'll be sorry if you get too deep into a subject that you may lose control. You'll create a monster. And so very much the same theme as Frankenstein and in the films. And that is not where Stevenson was going.
Yeah. I find that Jekyll and Hyde movies they're often kind of like werewolf movies in disguise, in a sense, that they've taken that same idea that you're going to transform into some monster that is completely uncontrollable until whatever force is making that goes away. And poor Larry Talbot is not responsible for what the Wolfman does, and absolutely not responsible. And I think that's what winds up happening. And then, especially at the end of these Jekyll and Hyde films and the movies too, or the early movie, even in the silence, when he dies at the end, he turns back into Jekyll, as if that's his true nature, right? Because now that you're dead, your body would go into its true nature, like the Wolfman does as well. But not in the book, which I think says a lot about who Stevenson really thinks this character is by the end.
This is I have to talk about Buffy because of me. So yes, and it's very similar to what goes on with both the werewolf character Oz, and that's my cat named Oz over on the chair, by the way, and who tries very hard to cage up the wolf inside. Well, Oz is a werewolf. He becomes a werewolf by accident, and he is determined to lock it up in a cage, his werewolf self. And he meets sometime during the series, he meets another werewolf who's not a very nice person and who makes no effort to control herself when she's a wolf. But she says to him, it isn't the full moon. The wolf is always in you. It's part of you. And what he does over the spoiler alert, what he does over the course of the series is he basically leaves to learn to control the wolf, to balance it as part, so that it's always him after that. It's not some crazy part of his own self that's come out. And by the way, the same with the vampires. I mean, the character Spike at the end basically understands that he is a soulless monster and decides that he wants to get that part of himself under control and
Yeah.
undertakes to do so and becomes heroic.
Yeah, I've seen this in lots of vampire, more modern vampire, films and TV that are, it's about accepting that, your vampire status and learning how to, control that. And it's
Right,
Twilight,
integrated,
obviously. Yeah.
become the whole person that Jekyll and Hyde should have.
Somebody mentioned in the chat earlier about the Incredible Hulk, which is, which is often and this is what happens in the Watchmen too. Like the Jekyll and Hyde Watchmen is more of a kind of Incredible Hulk transformation, isn't it?
Yeah, except that one's kind of that's permanent. Remember,
Yeah,
he doesn't go back and forth between
yeah.
being himself and Dr. Manhattan. He is permanently Dr. Manhattan. And but no, there's an
I
earlier
didn't mean
comic.
Watchmen. No, I'm sorry. I meant League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. The other more work,
Ah,
which you haven't done. Yes, I'm sorry.
the but
You haven't
right,
annotated that one yet.
right. But there is a comic book character named Mr. Hyde, who is much the same. He's sort of the precursor of the Hulk in many ways.
Hmm.
I think in the DC universe, I have something about it in the book, um, and he's very Hulk-like. Uh, I don't know. It's in here somewhere. Let's see. I have a whole. Yeah, no, it is a Marvel character, Mr. Hyde, Calvin Zabo, who transforms into Mr. Hyde, uh, and features in a number of Marvel comics for a period of time.
Stomps girls and murders, knights.
Yeah, and is taken on. Spider-Man has to go after him, and so on. But this idea just persists.
Yeah.
It's and has been well explored in so many different forms. The comics are wonderful.
Hyde was a Daredevil villain, Bob in the chat just said. V wants to know, can you talk more about this not being a morality tale? She says, I guess because I'm all out of patience for moral ambiguity in the current political climate, and I don't see the point of that.
Well, when I say it's not a morality tale, I don't see this as a sermon by Stevenson saying, "Don't be like Hyde," and further, don't be like the bad things that Jekyll did that we don't know about uh, when he was younger. That's not the point. The point, as I said, is about know yourself
Mhm.
and balance yourself. Uh, Figure out how to live with the parts of yourself that maybe you don't approve of, you yourself don't approve of.
Stevenson talked about how it's really a story about being a hypocrite, and all of these men are hypocrites, and this is what he's trying to point out in society. Not that they might be bad, but that they pretend that they're good, and that the bad side of them is still there, and they ignore
Absolutely.
it and hide
And of course, this is in many ways reflective of Stevenson's own struggles. Uh, he was being pressed by his family to live a respectable life. He really wanted to be an artist, a writer, and he wrestled with those parts of his own life and personality and tried to make them live in harmony
it. Mhm.
and lost. By the way, I mean, he lost that battle. He couldn't make them live in harmony in London or in England. He had to leave the country to go be where he could live an unfettered life.
Philemon and Samoa, he seemed to, finally, even the diseases stopped. The bronchial diseases, stopped when he finally went away. Yeah. So that was Stevenson cured himself of his old
Yeah,
desires.
exactly. He balanced it out. He balanced out the conflicts and figured out a way to make it work in a way that meshed with society, which is what Jekyll fails to do.
Mhm.
It's not socially acceptable to go around murdering people just because they get in your way.
Yeah, and we don't know why that murder happens, and it's another one
Road
of the
rage,
yeah, yeah.
walking road rage.
And if
Yeah, and the
anybody,
movies have tried to put a different motive on it. The
yeah,
movies have suggested that the victim was related to him, the father of his girlfriend,
yes.
etc., to try and make it sort of relatable motives. But no, it's basically a random killing.
If anyone has any questions, as we wrap this up, be happy to take them. How does Jekyll and Hyde compare with these other books you've annotated? And in that was the well, first, just in putting it together, did the process change at all, and how you go talk to people how you go out and research this?
Well, the process of annotating, I mean, I've got it. I won't say it's down to a science, but it's down to a method, um, which is to first, once I've selected the text, I mean, the first thing I do is go spend a bunch of money, typically a lot more than I ever make on the book, to go buy lots of books about the book. Uh, and things relating to the book. So I have my Stevenson library now of critical materials. But before I even dive into that, the first thing I want to do is read the text really slowly. Um, and I typically put in a whole bunch of what I call dummy footnotes, where it's either words that I don't understand or social references, cultural references that either I do understand, but I think nobody else will, or that I just don't understand. Um, and puzzles, things that bother me about the text. So there's all these footnotes. When I say footnotes, there's just footnote numbers. Sometimes I actually will write down a question for myself about what it is. Um, and then based on that, I try and go back and look at all that material I assembled and see if other people have answers to the questions that I've asked myself. Um, and I look for people that I'm not interested in literary analysis. I'm quick to admit that. My English majorhood is 60 years behind me, close to it, and I'm not an academic. I'm not interested in being a literary critic. Um, I'm interested in enriching the books that I love, um, and maybe acting as a tour guide through these books in some way, um, which is very different from being a literary critic and studying the grammatical structure or the act structure or deconstructing the book or anything like that. Um,
You
so
you do have some of it though, and some of it's quite good. This is on. We will learn later that this shabby doorway, this is the door that they're talking about that Hyde uses, is actually an entrance to Dr. Jekyll's compound. Its contrast to the neighborhood is mirrored by the description of the facade of Jekyll's home, which we will see contrast sharply with the disrepair of its surroundings. This is, of course, the physical embodiment of Jekyll's own duality. I mean, to notice that's you doing literary analysis. I love that. Thank you.
I probably stole it from somebody else, Edward, and just didn't cite it. Yeah, I mean, some of the things are unavoidable. I mean, you can't take the English major totally out of the kid, so
we talked about doors and keys and all these hidden, hidden doors that you're trying to get behind and nobody will show you and who's got the key and then he destroys the key, all these
Well,
symbols of what's going on are all.
yeah, and what interests me is not getting into the debate,
Mhm.
but to point out that there is a debate.
Yeah.
So some of this is just laziness, frankly. I mean, when I did Dracula, for example, there is so much critical material now uh, that is so awash in psychological crap and deconstruction of the text and all that, and it just didn't interest me. So I sort of, did a roadmap of here's all this stuff, shoved it into an appendix, and said, and if you want to go read that, here's where you can find it. Uh, please don't make me read it. Uh, so, I have a very different point of view, I think, than I'm no great literary scholar. I love the books and I love to uh, put these roadmaps together to show people the things that they might otherwise miss in the book. I always call what I do is sort of like the director's commentary, although that sounds too aggrandizing. I'm not the director, but it's like the commentary track on a DVD. This started when I think my wife pointed out this is very much meshes with my habits when we go to the movies, which is that I'll talk to the screen. Oh, look at that! That's just like this scene over here in that film, and oh, this is the best part. Look how he does this and all that. And that's what I'm doing in these books,
You don't do it in
talking
the
to the reader.
theater, do you? You don't do it in the theater, please. So
Well, we hardly ever go to the theater now, so I just do it on my home couch,
there you go. That you're
Uh,
allowed. Yeah.
but that's what I'm trying to do in the books. I'm talking into the ear of the reader about, look at this, watch that, pay attention to this, and notice that. And maybe you didn't understand this over here. Let me explain that. Um, and to supplement the book. These are books that I always tell people, if you're reading the book for the first time, please don't read my notes. Read the book through,
Read the
then
book
go back
first.
and read the
Yeah.
notes. Uh, but I hope that I bring added enjoyment to the books. That's my aim.
Can you recall any interesting rabbit hole you went down in this one? As I'm sure you have something like this for everything, that all your books wind up, there's some discovery, but I didn't ask you ahead of time
Yeah.
to come up with
Yeah, no,
this.
you didn't ask me ahead of time, and I'm trying to remember what it was. I think some of the old film history was really interesting to me. The stage presentations and learning about Richard Mansfield and all that, that really fascinated me. And I bought a book that was a biography of his life, um, and did go down that rabbit hole a bit. But it's again, it was the text. It was looking at these different versions of the text and finding things that just have disappeared. They didn't make it into the final version. And it's
Yeah.
like, whoa.
Yeah, and that's great to have. And I mean, of most of them that you've done, you do get to do this manuscript work with them as well,
Yeah.
which luckily you had.
Lovecraft, interestingly, is one where there's hasn't been very much textual analysis. And it's a field of study that I've been trying to spark. I'm trying to get Brown University to put together a series, kind of like the Baker Street Irregulars manuscript series, where they
Mhm.
will publish. They own a number of Lovecraft's manuscripts, um, and I haven't had an opportunity to study them, but I'd like to see them studied and examined. But no, I mean Frankenstein is, of course, fascinating manuscript.
Yeah.
Uh, and Dracula was incredible. Sherlock Holmes, I've a lot of the manuscript material didn't make it into the book because some of the research I did after that book came out. Uh, but again, same kind of things that got cut out in the manuscripts. That there's a couple where there were huge edits made,
Mhm.
especially the Lion's Mane is the one that has been sort of most edited um, before publishing, and great stuff.
Speaking of the Stevenson research, and I know you do a lot of cultural context of this. Max had a question about science in the book. Any theories about what chemistry Jekyll was experimenting with, et cetera. But just in general, did you do any of the science stuff with Stevenson?
Yeah, I took a lot of drugs and tried to see if they what they would do. Uh, well, I
Ergotine
looked
and
to see what
LSD.
was
Yeah.
out there.
Uh-huh.
I did look to see what science there was extant at the time, and there wasn't very much. So this is largely made up.
And I think Stevenson is kind of much like Frankenstein. He's not interested in he's not trying to create the exact science.
Right.
You know.
It's not important. The
Yeah.
details are not important. I mean, I have some notes about the chemicals that are mentioned and so on, but uh, it's this is a lesson that, of course, filmmakers have learned over the years, and Lovecraft was a big proponent of, which is, leave all that stuff off screen. It doesn't need to be. The details are not important. What's important is uh, believability, plausibility.
Was researching this much like the same as the others then? Was any
Sure. Yeah, it was very much like the others. Shorter. I mean, it's a short book, so it was a much quicker process. But it's this is has become a deep Victorian research library. I mean, I have uh, issues of the Britannica, the 1888 Britannica, the 1910 Britannica. I have medical books and Baedeker's and other travel guides, et cetera, that are all wonderful resources. And they were mostly assembled when I was doing Sherlock Holmes. And then I realized that they worked for all these others
Mhm.
as well. Uh, and not so much Frankenstein. Frankenstein was much more additional stuff, but
Yeah.
so the research process was much the same, turning to the same old books and finding interesting things.
What's going to happen to your research library? So let's.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it already happened in part because I many years ago had the experience of I knew that there was something on point and I couldn't find it, and I used Google Books to look for something, and I discovered that the material I was looking for was in a book about 5 feet away from me. Um, but the book what didn't have an index, and so I hadn't been able to put my finger on it. So I think there's some of that. I mean, research like the computer is great. The internet is fantastic for doing research on lots and lots of things. Um, but I've always been dependent, and I'm sure it shows if anybody would seriously critique my books, on serendipity. Um, and that means flipping through a book and saying, "Oh, I that's relevant to something that I would never think was relevant to," and sort of connecting the two. Uh, the I remember this discovery. My favorite story about that was the entry in the Britannica about a painter um, whose name escapes me at the moment, but I'll think the last name does not escape me. Uh, I was researching something about uh, a quote from a Sherlock Holmes story in which I was looking at the biography in the Britannica about uh, General Gordon, Chinese Gordon, relevant to one of the stories. And next to it on the page is a an article about somebody named John Watson Gordon. Wow, how's that for a name?
Huh.
And turns out he was a prominent Scottish portrait artist of the day, and he added the Gordon so that he wouldn't be confused with his brother, whose name was Charles Watson. And it ended up, I wrote this whole article saying, "Is this why is art in whose blood?" is the article.
Mhm.
Uh, I proposed that Watson had spent time with his uncle, and uh, it's funny. I ended up calling the National Portrait Gallery in Edinburgh to talk to them about this artist, and I told them why, and they said it wasn't real. It's like those people.
Any other Stevenson works you would recommend to people?
Well, I've mentioned in the introduction
Yeah.
the short story that what's the name of it?
Markheim?
Yes, Markheim. That is well worth reading. It's a terrific story, and you'll see echoes of
Yeah.
Jekyll and Hyde in that story. But of course, this was not, I mean, this is what we're talking about today, but Stevenson was a wonderful writer. Yeah, if you haven't read Treasure Island as an
Yeah.
adult, go read it.
Oh, so worth it. Yeah. I'd love to do a show on Treasure Island. Boy, I love that. So we don't have it in our
I
collection.
pitched an annotated edition of that, and I was like, no, poo-poo,
Oh, goodness. That would be, yeah, that would be great.
maps
It
and
still
charts
turns
and
up. Still turns up as movies and all all kinds of
absolutely.
adaptations.
Who doesn't like pirates?
Everybody loves pirates, especially the original pirate, Long John Silver.
There
So,
you go.
based on Robert Louis Stevenson's friend, W.E. Henley, who he wrote the Deacon Brodie play with. And then it was Henley's brother who played in the Deacon Brodie play. And as I learned from Paul Chapman doing this show, once when the Deacon Brodie was being performed in Philadelphia, Teddy Henley got in a brawl in a Philadelphia bar. And
So by the way,
during
we
the play.
should so we don't besmirch his character. Henley was not a pirate. He just had a
No, but
wooden leg.
he had a
He had a
wooden
wooden
leg.
leg.
Yeah, maybe I should have mentioned that.
Yes. He was definitely not a pirate.
Yes, but had a wooden leg and a big personality, and kind of controlled a room when he was in there. Told great stories.
Yes.
Yeah. Any more annotations in the works now? Are you working on anything?
Well,
Pitching anything?
yeah, I mean, a couple of projects. Thank you for letting me slip in a couple plugs. One that I love to plug is the Library of Congress Crime Classics series. I think I turned in now volume number 21 in the series. This is what it sounds like. It's American mystery classics, annotated by me. I would call them light annotations, annotated with an introduction and a biography of the author. They're trade paperbacks published by the Library of Congress. They're wonderful. They range from 1866 all the way up to 1961 or 62. And there's some wonderful material. And I'm also doing an annotated edition of a collection of Lord Dunsany's novels. That's a project with Guillermo del Toro.
Wow.
And that should be very exciting
I
when we
love
finally get
that.
it
And
done.
how were you able to get that pitch to a pub? Well, is it Del Toro
Well,
that
yes.
secured it?
Here's how the pitch went, Edward. It went like this. Guillermo del Toro wants to do this book. He approached me about doing this book. Are you interested? And the publisher said, his name's going to be on the front as co-author? And I said, yes. They said, okay.
Tell people who Lord Dunsany is.
Lord Dunsany is probably the greatest influence on Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. He was an early fantasist who wrote some wonderful books in the 1910s, and then one in the 1920s called The King of Elfland's Daughter. First one is called The Gods of Pagania. Second one is called Time and the Gods, and King of Elfland's Daughter. And we're going to do those three in an annotated edition. Guillermo's a huge fan, and he asked me if I would do this book with him. And just like the publisher, I said, okay.
I love those. That's great.
So it's in the works. It's pretty far along, but there's a lot to do. I'm hoping to actually have access to the family's papers, journals, manuscripts. Nobody's ever seen them. And there's a family connection. There is a current Lord Dunsany, and he seems to be very open to the project. So
excellent. I love it. More people reading that would be great.
Yeah.
All right, Les, thank you.
My pleasure.
Biblioventures, thank you for joining us for episode 6 of Monsters and Ghosts, our final episode on Robert Louis Stevenson's Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Les, thank you for joining us, and thank you for your books.
You're so welcome. They are a joy to produce, and they're a joy to talk about. Thank you.
And a joy to read. Let me tell you, they come out, and that is absolutely, I love them. Thank you. On the next episode, everyone, in 2 weeks, if you're watching live, Olivia Ritigliano comes back. Hooray!
Hooray!
And we will begin stave 1 of Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol. The Ghosts Are Restless, and we're going to talk about them. Thanks to our chat pool, Brianna, for managing the live chat links. We couldn't do these shows without the generous support of our patrons. You can support the Rosenbach through donation. Your support helps us create more programs like this and also care for our collections. You can also become a member. Membership gives you early access and discounts to programs and courses and early access to registration. You can find out more at our website, rosenbach.org. Remember, if you're watching live and become a member right now, you'll receive an additional month added to your membership. That's 13 months instead of 12. Again, let me remind you to subscribe to our channel, to like these videos. And that's all we got for Jekyll and Hyde. Thanks much. Bye, Les.
Take care. Have a good evening.
I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library, where the door to your Biblioventure is always open. Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Okay, it's the World Series. It's on. All right, I'm leaving the house now. So I'll be there in about 45 minutes.